Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are lucky to be joined by Labour's spokesperson for Emergency Management, ACC and the Public Service, Camilla Belich. Before Camilla got into politics, she was an employment lawyer and she's been working as an advocate for workers' rights since she was a teenager. Today we're just going to briefly cover some of Camilla's portfolio work, her members' bills, and a couple of topics where Camilla spoke and had a call in Parliament. Examples are pay equity and pay reductions for going on strike or partial strikes. So welcome to the show, Camilla.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. We'll start with emergency management. The government scrapped Labour's $6 billion National Resilience Plan in the face of increasingly severe weather events, and you've said that the emergency management plan in New Zealand needs urgent reform and investment in order to place New Zealand in the best possible place to respond to a major natural disaster. And you've been visiting civil defence and emergency management groups around New Zealand, and there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and you've publicly said that there's some very fine people working in agencies like NEMA. Could you please comment on the work that is in progress, and what are the major, most important things that New Zealand needs to achieve in emergency management reform?
Thanks. Great question, and really important question for the whole country. I think that we as a country really need to accept that we are going to have increasingly more of these natural disasters, especially due to climate change in the near future. So we do need to have the best systems in place, and that does mean making sure that our emergency management legislation is up to date, and also the systems that implement that as well. So you're right that we did have a bill before the House to update the emergency management system. We thought it would have been a good idea to continue with that bill, as it had already been through select committee and had a number of submissions on it. That wasn't the government's view, so they've gone back to the drawing board following some reviews that have happened in relation to the Cyclone Gabriel and the Auckland anniversary floods, and they tell us that they intend to put legislation before the House sometime this year. So that will be interesting to see, and we are kind of coming at emergency management from an opposition perspective, really in good faith. We really would like to see an emergency management system that works for New Zealand, that puts New Zealand in the best possible position. So we won't be looking to be point scoring against the government. We will be looking at the initial stage to try and make suggestions that will hopefully put New Zealand in a position where we can have cross-party support for emergency management changes. So that's our objective at this stage. Obviously things can change depending on what the government does, but we are hoping that we can suggest some changes that will result in an updated act, which is sorely needed, and hopefully be in a better position to face some of those natural disasters. And that does need to have funding. In the recent budget, we didn't see substantive cuts, unlike in other areas of the public service. So we would like to not just not see cuts, but to actually see investment within the areas that are needed. So I think probably legislation is the first thing on the minister's agenda at the moment, and but we'll be looking to make sure that legislation actually transforms into change on the ground, because it's very, very important for a country like New Zealand to get this right.
Excellent. Well, moving very quickly on to ACC. Last year, you've actually said that we can't trust National with ACC, and at the time there was a very live and current question around whether or not the government was going to cut ACC eligibility for sexual survivors of sexual violence, and now we're seeing pauses to sexual violence prevention programs inside ACC. We're also hearing these stories in the public about a flip-flopping story, really, about ethnicity being a proximity for workplace injuries. And ACC data tells us that Maori and Pacific peoples experience disproportionately high rates of injuries in the manufacturing sector, for example. But we're seeing ACT coming in and kind of intervening here with Scott Simpson at the National Party and kind of doing flip-flops, that's what I'm seeing anyway, with regard to some of the tender processes. And they even go back into the public service, kind of rewriting mandates and things here that are kind of at the root level. So could you talk a bit about these kind of areas within ACC and what's really going on?
Yeah, well, I think most New Zealanders see ACC as a real taonga for New Zealand, a real aspect of a reflection of our society that shows that we want to make sure that people who suffer injury are not placed in a really disadvantageous position in relation to their earnings. So it really is fundamentally quite different to a lot of countries that we compare ourselves to. So I think starting from that point, what our perspective would be is we really have to support ACC and make sure it's a robust system. And what we did when we were last in government was actually look at areas where there are discrepancies in ACC. For example, for women, when you look at the statistics, fewer women obtain ACC. And you might say, well, that's fair enough if they're not getting injured as much. But what we found is a number of injuries that women were more likely to suffer were not covered by ACC. So there was a change in relation to birth injuries that we brought in when we were in government. So we really want to make sure that ACC is a robust scheme, and it is really concerning when we hear the Minister talk about how the scheme is, will make comments alluding to the unsustainability of the scheme, which he has said publicly, and also about the fact that he will not rule out changes to cover for people who are survivors of sexual abuse. And this stems from a really significant court case that interpreted the ACC rules in such a way that meant that people who were survivors of sexual abuse, it didn't just start from the date you reported it, it started from when you suffered that abuse. And so that was a Court of Appeal decision. To hear the Minister for those victims of some of the most atrocious, horrible things you can ever imagine, for them to hear that the Minister is thinking about cutting their eligibility to ACC is very concerning. And the Minister has said maybe they'll be entitled to something else. Well, I'm not really aware of another form of compensation, especially for people who are unable to work, which is equivalent to ACC. So that is very concerning for us. In relation to the focus on, which seems to be happening across the government, that they seem unable to implement or carry through with programs that have a particular focus on particular groups of New Zealanders which are disproportionately affected. I think that is a real shame, and I think they're spending too much time focusing on making sure they don't use the words Māori or Pacifica in their programs when they really should be focusing on the issues that are disproportionately affecting those groups of people. There's clear correlation between some of those programs and need. It's based on fact, it's based on evidence. I don't see why they should be so afraid of using facts to determine where resources go in public policy. So I'd really like to see the government focus on what's important rather than editing documents and programs that are really there based on evidence to address need.
Fabulous. I've noticed that there's been some changes at ACC at the very top in the board, and you were talking about things that we see as a pattern across government. I've seen major changes, which you might call stacking the decks when it comes to board level changes happening across many different areas of the public service. You've got Kaianga Ora, everyone left. You've got Health in New Zealand, just everyone got shunted out of there. We had Lester Levy come in. Now we've got another crew coming in now, and we've seen sort of strange appointments. We've got Paula Bennett. It's running as the chair of Pharmac, and we've lost Adrian Orr over at the Reserve Bank. Now ACC's chair has decided to go, and I don't know. Can you comment on any of this kind of stuff that what's going on? Do you sort of see sort of some of these organisations like ACC kind of standing up maybe a bit to change and then deciding to leave, or is this all just fairly normal stuff we usually see when there's a change of government?
You usually see some change when there's a change of government for whatever reason. I think it is notable, as you have illustrated in your question, the number of changes that we have seen. However, it's very difficult to point to necessarily an individual example unless that person is willing to kind of come forward and tell their story and say, actually this was not my choice, or I was forced out. And I'm sure if that is true, that eventually that would be something that would make it into their public arena. But in relation to the ACC board chair, I don't have any information to suggest that what she'd said around family reasons was not correct. She said she had to spend some more time in Australia, and I think it's important that you and I and people who are holding decision makers to account make these assessments of when there does seem to be a large exodus. But I suppose for individual people, we really do have to, I guess, take them at their word unless we hear otherwise in that particular situation.
Well, I think it would be quite factual to say that the public service has suffered a lot of cuts in the last 18 months. And I have a kind of a pretty special question here. Have you gotten a straight answer from National's Louise Upston yet about what steps she is taking to support all of those workers that have lost their jobs? Have you heard back from her yet?
Look, it's a big concern at the moment, I think, for everyone. I don't think many people in New Zealand are feeling particularly good about the direction of the country or the economy, and I think that one of the harshest way that is showing itself up is with these high numbers of unemployment that we do have in New Zealand at the moment, and that really makes it difficult for people to change jobs, to move up in different positions, to they may stay in jobs longer than that they're not happy in because they're not sure about getting employment elsewhere. So I think this has been a really huge problem, and really, from our perspective, we like to see people kept in jobs, and that was a huge focus during COVID, keeping people in employment. This government will say, well, they're going to grow the economy and that's going to lead to more jobs. And I suppose we would say to that there are people in jobs at the moment, and we should try and support the economy to be able to sustain those people who are in their current roles. So it's a different way of looking at it, but it is something that is raised with us a lot, and it's one of our key priorities going into the next election is to focus on jobs, making sure that there are jobs available, that those jobs are well paid, that there are fair terms and conditions in those jobs, and that people feel stable enough to contribute to the economy, to make decisions about funding their companies and their businesses, to make spending decisions. And at the moment, I don't think people are in that space at the moment. So I don't think we do have a clear answer from the government about what they're going to do. And I think it's cold comfort to people who have lost their jobs to hear that hopefully soon the economy will grow when they're looking at unemployment and not being able to pay their bills.
Exactly. Hey, what work are you currently involved in the public service portfolio?
Well, it's a really interesting portfolio, and I think it is something which characterises the different political parties and their approach to what role the state does have. And at the moment, you'll see in the coalition government, you have parties like the ACT Party who will not shy away from the fact that they do have an ideological position of a smaller state. And we do have concerns around the entire government moving towards that model where either we see them withdrawing from certain areas, or we see particular aspects of service delivery from the state being watered down to such an extent that they become ineffective. And so we see that in health as one example. So that is extremely concerning for us, and we would like to see a public service that is well-resourced, that is full of good people, and that's not to say that the public service is always perfect. We need to have accountable public service and public servants that are doing the best job they can for New Zealand. And I think that's always their intention. So I think that we are really looking towards having a public service that can help innovate and can help lead economic growth. And I don't really feel that they're being given that chance with this government, because there are so many reductions in funding at the moment. There's a great feeling of instability. They're expected to do the same amount with less. And so that's one of our focuses, is focusing on our policy for the next election, reflecting those ideals that we do have, which are different from the government, and also making sure that when we get back into government, that we have a public service that's efficient and really delivering what New Zealanders need. So it's very much a work in progress for us as an opposition party, but one that we can clearly see differentiates from the current government.
Great. Hey, let's talk about your members' bills. Thanks to you, workers can now go to the police if an employer wrongfully withholds pay. So thank you very much. That's passed into law. It's a great members' bill. It's passed into law recently. You've got a couple of other ones that I'm aware of. One of them's to do with pay secrecy, and that's at a select committee. And you've also got another one on corporate manslaughter, which may still be in the biscuit tin. Could you talk to us about those bills and what they're actually all about?
Sure. So yeah, three kind of different stages of those members' bills. So it was really great to have the wage theft bill passed into law. That was a bill that I had inherited from my colleague Ibrahim Omar, who had actually suffered wage theft when he first came to New Zealand as a refugee. So a really amazing story of someone who came to New Zealand, suffered an injustice, and then was able to contribute to that being changed in our parliament so that other people wouldn't suffer from that again. So that was a really great process to be involved with, and seeing that successfully through parliament. So yes, now you can go to the police around that, and I think it will be obviously up to the police to prosecute. So they'll be looking for obviously a lot of evidence and compelling intention from anyone that they choose to prosecute under that legislation. But there are unfortunately bad actors in New Zealand in some instances, obviously not the majority of employers or business owners, but that tiny majority has been getting away with some pretty terrible practices. So good to have that as an option for the police to prosecute under. So that is now law. And the pay secrecy bill has been reported back from Select Committee now. So I imagine that will have its committee stage probably on the next Members' Day. So it won't be next week, but maybe the week after. And I'm hoping that will continue to be supported through the House. It's a little bit bittersweet with that bill, because I think it is particularly important, pay secrecy now, and that it's essentially outlawing pay secrecy. So it's allowing people to talk about their own pay, and that is particularly important following the government's horrendous and backwards changes on pay equity. So we have a system now with pay equity where finding a comparator is really difficult, if not impossible, and the government has severely restricted the number of comparator workforces that you can look at. So this bill allows people to have conversations much more freely. It prevents them from being disciplined by their employer if they do speak about their pay. So I think, unfortunately, although I'm happy to see this bill go through the House, it will be of increased importance given the retroactive changes that have happened in relation to pay equity. And it was always the intention of this bill that it would assist with pay equity claims, and it would also assist with equal pay claims within the workplace too. So happy to be able to, hopefully, if the other parties in Parliament choose to continue to support it, allow those freer conversations, but unfortunately those will be of more importance because of the restrictions to pay equity. So that's that one. And then the last one is, still in the biscuit tin, is a corporate manslaughter bill. I think it's one of the, it hasn't had the best of luck, that bill so far. I think it's one of the oldest bills in the biscuit tin to date. And it's a really good bill, and one that I would also think had a relatively good chance of possibly obtaining cross-party support. It looks at some of the horrendous examples of death that we've seen in some workplaces, and the huge frustration from victims' families, that the fact that maybe those accountable have not been held to account in New Zealand. And you may have seen the Minister for Workplace Relations on Q&A over the weekend, and she was kind of telling workplace off a wee bit around taking novel proceedings, and this particular type of proceeding, probably under our existing legislation, would be thought of as quite novel. And so I think with that directive, probably is increasingly important to have a specific crime of corporate manslaughter that really looks at negligence, and really the situation where there is a high degree of culpability around an accident that is foreseeable in the workplace. We have had a lot of advocacy from people like the families of the victims in Pike River, that they didn't feel that the current legislative regime really was sufficient to hold those who were responsible for that tragedy to account. And so this bill is looking to change the law to try and recognise that when those situations do occur, that the people who are responsible for that should be held to account.
That's excellent. We'll come back to Pike River in a little bit. Pay equity was an absolute shocker for most of the public, I think. And during that time, although that's not quite your area, you took a number of calls during the fight to stop what I would call, Van Velden's theft, if you like. This was one big shocker, really, like a massive injustice from my point of view. Your questions and proposed amendments about the comparators were very, very on point. And the government was reducing the way that you could, compare workers in one industry or one sector with another. And they're also shifting the thresholds. And you made a lot of good points in there in your amendments. Could you elaborate on a little bit of the detail there about what the government was trying to do in that legislation to reduce comparisons, and how the comparators were working, and what this change to the law has done now, and where it's left all the mainly women workers?
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree with you. This was a huge shock, really upsetting, especially for a number of people that have worked a really long time, including Christine Bartlett, who was New Zealander of the Year due to her work on pay equity. So, shocking move from the government. And one of the areas, I think there's probably about 5 areas that they've changed to make this law really unworkable, unless there's a situation where an employer essentially wants to pay a pay equity claim. I think it's really going to be unworkable unless you're in that situation. So, in relation to comparators, the concept of pay equity, as you'll be aware, is about gender-based undervaluation. That's often an issue to do with society and the type of work that women have done. So traditionally, caring roles that you might associate with kind of motherhood, or roles to do with taking care of a home. A lot of those, when they've been professionalised, have been undervalued. Other things like teaching, which have been traditionally female-dominated, maybe haven't had the same value put on to them, and that's to do with the position of women within society historically, and the undervaluation of women's skills. So the pay equity regime that was in place allowed female-dominated professions to look at the type of work that they were undertaking and a comparative type of work that male-dominated professions were undertaking, and not exactly compare them. And I think this is the mistake that the government's made in some of their public comments on comparators. but look at an aspect of their work and say, well, why do we value that in a male dominated role, but when we see it in a female dominated role, it's not remunerated at the same level? And some of those things can be quite surprising. For example, in care and support work, unless you are aware of seen care and support workers during their day, you might not be aware how much heavy lifting is involved. And often we see male dominated professions really valued for this kind of strength and physical energy which is utilised in order to perform that work. And we haven't seen that as much in care and support work. But at the same time, because of the clients that care and support workers are dealing with, they often will have to utilise physical strength and put their body really on the line in order to do their job. And so our previous pay equity regime really allowed a fulsome analysis of the female-dominated role and comparative male-dominated roles. And it was roles, not a single role. So you might have seen the publicly commented on analysis between a librarian and a fisheries officer. Now, in that particular case, that was just one of the comparatives that was used to try and get a firmer picture on whether there were undervalued skills that librarians had. And when you do that type of analysis, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will utilise a comparator because you look at them or you assess them. You might decide when you've gone through that process that they're not acceptable. But because it's quite a involved process and it's quite a complex process to look at all of those particular skills, it really does benefit from being able to look at, this particular aspect of this role might work with this particular comparator and so on. What the government has done with these pay equity changes in relation to comparators is to restrict that initially to your own employer. So you would have to see, are there any male-dominated roles employed by the same employer? And if you can't find any with the same employer, you can look to your wider industry. But unfortunately, that's as far as you can really go. And there's a kind of inherent misunderstanding, I think, in this change, because when pay equity was first, pay equity claims were first allowed to be taken due to the historic case brought by Christine Bartlett, it was about making sure that female-dominated roles were valued. So it was equal pay for work of equal value. And really, by the government limiting this to an employer, it's much more similar to an equal pay claim, which is when people are doing the same role. And I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding here from the government on what pay equity was meant to achieve. It's not actually about pointing to an individual employer and saying you are culpable because you have paid a male-dominated role that you employ more than a female-dominated role that you employ. It's really about understanding that these problems that society has created, in order to rectify them, we really need to have a broader view. So the comparator changes will really stop a large number of claims going forward. It might be that a claim that's based on evidence that is a female-dominated role that has been undervalued just can't find an appropriate male comparator within their particular industry. And so therefore the claim fails. And so I think it's really short-sighted of the government to make this change. And I think it will mean that really important pay equity claims and undervalued workforces will be stopped from achieving pay equity because of these changes.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right about all of that. Great work, by the way, when you were fighting with the others to try and stop this. It's just a complete outrage.
Yeah, well, the fight continues.
And, we'd love to see what Labour has to say about all this when it comes to policy as well,
Yeah, and I think it is important to note that, right, as soon as this happened, we talked about we were really committed to reversing this, and we are. Mm-hmm, so, I don't think that will come as a surprise to anyone. The current scheme is totally unworkable, and if we really do believe in pay equity, we need to change it to a scheme that will actually allow female-dominated occupations to make those claims successfully.
Excellent. Now, on workers' rights and working to rule, I I'm seeing this coming under attack from Van Velden as well, and the government has recently kind of introduced some kind of 10% arbitrary pay cut. You could be docked for working to rule, finishing all the tasks in your job description. But I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit upon what is the government doing here in legislation, and what's going on. Is this an ongoing pattern we're seeing as well from this government when it comes to workers' rights overall?
Absolutely, this government is attacking workers' rights, and I think they've been quite clear about that has been their purpose. And what we see, they say it's about rebalancing towards both workers and employers, but all we see is attacks on workers. So I don't accept a lot of their changes, and this particular one on partial strikes is particularly concerning because it's actually reversing a change that was made when Labor was in government. And the reason that change was made is because there are examples of employers using things like people wearing a political t-shirt or a badge or something that indicated support for industrial action during the bargaining period, and that being considered a partial strike. And that was stopped, and because of that concern that was unfairly targeting employees. And there's been really no analysis as to why this change needs to come back. I think they talked to a number of government departments, but in the regulatory impact statement, if you read that, you'll see that also the officials say they haven't had time to do a kind of in-depth analysis on whether this is needed or not. So although this one did go through a select committee process, there's still issues with the evidence base for making this change. And I think there are a few things in this bill which are particularly unfair. One is the one that you mentioned, that there could be a 10% pay deduction. So an example, which is, it just sounds so outrageous, but it could be covered under this act, is if you're a teacher and you, as part of your job, coach a sports team, which is very common for teachers, and you decide as a kind of a work to rule industrial action strategy that you are no longer going to coach that sports team. You don't get paid any extra for doing this. You do that voluntarily as a part of your role. That the employer, if you take that action, could decide to dock 10% of your wages for you not doing something that you did voluntarily. That's also the same for wearing an item of clothing. And it's also the same for if you say you did reduce your labour, but say you did it by 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, your employer could still dock your wages by 10%. So it's a very arbitrary and unfair system. It's different from what we have, what other countries have. In Australia and in the UK, they do have sanctions for partial strikes, but they're proportionate to the withdrawal of labour. And I actually put that to the minister, why doesn't she have something which is more similar to countries we compare ourselves to, which is more proportionate if she wants to have a fair piece of legislation, and she rejected that. So it is problematic. It will result in unfairness, and we've just seen on the weekend, I was at a picket line yesterday for a company that had suspended its workers who are partially striking. So you can see that even in our existing regime, there are tools available for employers to address partial strikes. We don't need this new piece of legislation. I think it will just add more unfairness into workplaces.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I did see you guys out there protesting that. Good on you for being out there and being so active. I said before that we would come back to WorkSafe and that Q&A thing that we just saw in the weekend. Wow. But WorkSafe in general, and when it came to this new film about Pike River, you've actually seen it, haven't you?
I haven't seen it. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you make some general comments about WorkSafe and the kind of thing we're just seeing, like at the moment? It's this ideological change. It's this change without evidence. It's this arbitrary. I believe I've been on a road show, and I've heard things. But, in actual fact, the evidence base again, we're seeing this again and again. It's just not there. And these kind of like ideological changes when it comes to workers' safety.
Yeah, and I'm disappointed from this recent announcement from the minister, because I think health and safety is an area that doesn't have to have disagreement from both sides of the house. I mean, in labour relations, traditionally, that's a very there's obviously there are very different views on the left and the right as to what needs to happen in that area. But I don't think health and safety necessarily needs to be one of those areas, and that's because we all of us want the same result, which is safe workplaces where people come home at the end of the day, where people aren't injured or maimed for doing their job. That's something that no one would disagree with. And what we did see with this minister's particular actions in relation to health and safety is that there was a consultation period. You know, what should happen with health and safety? This particular piece of legislation was nearing 10 years. And there was almost consensus within unions and businesses, and you might have seen that actually the CTU and Business New Zealand, a number of other health and safety organisations actually penned a joint letter to the minister outlining what they thought that she should do in health and safety. And you do, you know, it's unusual to see that level of consensus, but I think if I was the minister, I would really jump on that, because that is a way of building a sustainable system where everyone has a degree of agreement as to the direction going forward. And what they were advocating for really was not really a change to legislation, which I understand is, you know, there's still to be announcements on that, but a focus on making sure that the regulations and the implementation of some of the specific rules in relation to particular industries were stronger, and were robust, and were, you know, doing the job that we needed to see them doing. So this particular move from WorkSafe now that's just been announced, that they're going to try and tell people things rather than do enforcement action, I think is concerning when we have such terrible health and safety rates in New Zealand. I mean, we are lagging behind the United Kingdom, we're lagging behind Australia. We have very similar legislation to both of those countries. So we really, I think that's why what the businesses and unions said made sense. The framework's there, it's about implementation. And I don't think their view was that should be that WorkSafe doesn't do enforcement. And I think it was really unclear and I know that this was put to the minister, what enforcement will not be happening now, because it's clear that there's a dwindling amount of resource, and that's meant to be focused more on education. But, you know, what enforcement is not happening, and we do have a problem in New Zealand with health and safety. So I think the current announcements are misdirected. I think the minister thus far has missed out on an opportunity to build consensus around this incredibly important area. I was our spokesperson in that area at the time of the consultation, and we organised with the CTU a huge meeting at Parliament, and we in good faith invited the minister there, and she was able to hear what the priorities for unions and workers are, and she did turn up to that, and I thought that was a good sign, but so far those calls have been ignored. So it is disappointing, and there couldn't be I was going to say there couldn't be anything more serious. I'm sure there are things that are just as serious, but this is really about people's health and safety. It is about a system that, if it's working well, saves lives. So it's not something to be trifled with, and I just really wish that preventing harm and making sure that those who do flout the rules are held to account was at the upfront of those decision makers' minds when they're looking at this.
Thank you. When it comes to, this is going to be the final question, when it comes to the choices that we all face as a country now heading into the next election, could you just make some final comments about workers' rights and your members' bills and the portfolios you're working up, summing up this government and the choices that we all face when it comes to this next election?
I think next election is really important, and that's because we do have clearly a government which is focused on division and not bringing New Zealand together. And on the alternative, we have in our party a clear focus on jobs, health and homes, on making sure that we have people in employment, making sure we have a health system that delivers for New Zealanders, and making sure that people can buy their first home, that they have access to housing, that we aren't seeing an increasing number of people living on our streets, that we are the type of society that New Zealanders want to see. And we're also seeing this government repeal a number of laws which really reflect our identity as a nation. And you saw that with Treaty Principles Bill, which was absolutely shocking way to address one of our founding documents, one of our constitutional documents. And you've also seen that with pay equity, when something that was a consensus that was voted on by every member of Parliament at that time has been eroded. So I think there is a clear choice to make next election, and I really hope New Zealand makes what I consider to be the correct one, which is to change the government.
Thank you so much for your comments today on G News, and I'm sure the audience really appreciates all your work and what you've had to say today. I'd love to have you back here again sometime soon to update us on some of these issues. Thank you very much, Camilla.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah.